It was the beginning of a new chapter in my life. After years of hard work, I'd finally landed my dream job, and I'd moved to a new city to start fresh. The place was vibrant, full of opportunity, and I couldn't wait to settle in. I found a cozy apartment not too far from my job, in an older, quiet building that had a certain charm to it. The rent was surprisingly affordable, especially for an apartment in the city. Room 13 was mine, and I thought nothing of the number. Superstitions weren't really my thing. The first few days went smoothly. I settled into my new routine, working the first shift, coming home in the evening, cooking a quick meal, and then unwinding with a book or TV. I was exhausted from the move and the adjustment to my new job, so I didn't notice anything unusual at first. It wasn't until the second week that things started to feel off. It was subtle at first. One night, as I lay in bed, half asleep, I heard soft sounds coming from the kitchen. At first, I thought I'd left something on, maybe a dripping faucet or a faulty appliance. I dragged myself out of bed and padded quietly toward the kitchen. The sound grew louder, cutlery clinking, the faint rustle of someone preparing food. But when I flicked on the light, the kitchen was empty. The counters were bare, the stove cold. Everything was exactly how I'd left it. Maybe it's the neighbors, I told myself, shrugging it off. The walls were thin, after all. But the sounds persisted. Night after night, always around the same time, I would hear the faint noise of someone moving around in the kitchen. And it wasn't just the kitchen. A few nights later, I was jolted awake by the sound of running water. Groggy and confused, I stumbled into the bathroom, expecting to find a burst pipe or a leaky faucet. But the shower was running. I hadn't turned it on. I stood there for a moment, staring at the water pouring from the showerhead, the steam beginning to fog the mirror. My heart pounded, and I quickly shut it off. I checked the faucet and the toilet. Nothing was leaking. Everything was fine. I told myself I must have somehow turned it on without realizing it and went back to bed, though sleep didn't come easily. As the weeks passed, the disturbances became more frequent. I started noticing little things. My closet door would be open when I was sure I'd closed it. My clothes hangers would clatter together as though someone had just rifled through them. It felt as if someone was living in the apartment with me, but they were never there when I checked. Strangely, whatever, or whoever, it was didn't seem malicious. In fact, it felt helpful. One day, I bought a small indoor plant to brighten up the apartment. I wasn't exactly known for having a green thumb, so I figured the plant would die within a week from my neglect. But to my surprise, every time I checked, the soil was always damp, as if someone had been watering it. I hadn't touched it once. I began to feel a strange comfort in the presence. It was as though someone was taking care of me, watching over me. The sounds at night no longer scared me as much. Instead, I accepted them as part of the routine. I'd hear someone cooking in the kitchen, and I'd just roll over in bed, reminding myself that it was just her going about her business. Still, there was one thing that bothered me. At the end of every month, I'd send in my rent check, but the strange thing was that every time, my check would get mailed back to me a few days later, unopened. At first, I thought it was some kind of clerical error, so I called the leasing office. "Hi, this is from apartment 13, I said when the receptionist picked up. "I've been trying to send in my rent, but the check keeps getting returned." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Oh," the woman said, sounding confused. "Your rent is already paid." "What? That's impossible. I haven't paid it yet." "No, it's been paid in full. We have no record of any outstanding balance for your unit." I was stunned. "By who?" "I'm not sure, but everything is covered. You're good to go." After I hung up, I sat there in shock. Rent paid? By whom? I hadn't told anyone about my situation, no one even knew where I was living. I checked my bank account, but sure enough, no rent payment had been withdrawn. Later that week, I struck up a conversation with one of my neighbors, an older woman who had lived in the building for years. I mentioned the strange rent situation to her, hoping she might have some insight. Her eyes widened when I told her my apartment number. "You're in room 13, she asked, her voice lowering to a whisper. "Yeah," I replied, feeling a chill creep up my spine. "Why?" She leaned in closer. "A woman used to live there. Nice lady, but she died about 6 months ago. Had a heart attack in her sleep. Poor thing was all alone." I stared at her, the pieces slowly falling into place. "You mean, no one's lived in that apartment since?" She shook her head. "No, it was empty for a while. You're the first one to move in after she passed." I swallowed hard. The sounds at night, the closet door opening, the rent being mysteriously paid. It all made sense now. The presence I'd been feeling wasn't just in my head. The woman who had lived here before me hadn't left. She was still here, living in the apartment with me. Part of me wanted to run, to pack up my things and leave immediately. But another part of me, an even larger part, felt oddly at peace. She hadn't hurt me. In fact, she seemed to be helping me. Watering my plant, keeping me company, even paying my rent. I thought about moving out, but I couldn't bring myself to leave. Something about her presence was comforting. I wasn't alone. She was still here, quietly living in the apartment just as she always had. And so, I stayed. The sounds continued, footsteps in the kitchen, the soft hum of the shower running at night, the gentle clatter of clothes hangers in the closet. I no longer felt afraid. I was sharing my apartment with someone, a spirit who had passed on but hadn't left. But every so often, I catch myself glancing at the empty corner of the room, wondering if one day, I'll finally see her. Standing there, watching me. Waiting. Life in room 13 carried on as usual for the next few months. The strange occurrences became part of my nightly routine, the sounds of cooking, the rustle of clothes in my closet, and the shower turning on by itself. I accepted that the previous tenant, the woman who had passed away, was still there, stuck in her old routine. She wasn't harmful, and in a strange way, I grew used to her presence. It was almost like having a quiet, invisible roommate. But things changed when I met Jenna. Jenna and I had been dating for a few weeks, and it was getting serious. I hadn't mentioned anything about the apartment's strange activity to her because, honestly, how do you tell someone, by the way, I live with a ghost? Besides, I figured the spirit was harmless. She had never bothered me, until Jenna started spending more time at my place. It began subtly, almost like the spirit was testing the waters. The first night Jenna stayed over, I noticed the kitchen noises were louder than usual. Instead of the gentle clinking of cutlery or the soft sound of someone prepping food, it sounded like someone was angrily slamming pots and pans around. I remember lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. Jenna, who had fallen asleep beside me, stirred but didn't wake. I convinced myself it was nothing. But the next morning, things escalated. As Jenna was getting dressed, the closet door, which was usually left slightly ajar, slammed shut with such force that the whole apartment seemed to shake. Jenna jumped, her face pale. "What the hell was that?" she asked, her voice trembling. I tried to play it off, but I was rattled. It's probably just the old building settling," I muttered. I didn't want to scare her. But I knew, deep down, it was the spirit. She wasn't happy. Something about Jenna being there was upsetting her. As the days went on, the activity in the apartment grew more intense. Every time Jenna came over, the noises in the kitchen got louder. The sound of someone chopping vegetables was replaced by the harsh slam of cabinet doors, drawers opening and shutting violently. And at night, I could feel it, the spirit's presence was stronger, closer. The room felt heavier, colder, like something was watching us. One night, I woke up around 3 a.m., my body frozen with fear. There, standing at the foot of the bed, was the woman. The ghost. Her figure was pale and hazy, barely solid, but I could see her clearly enough. She was soaking wet, like she'd just stepped out of the shower, water dripping from her clothes onto the floor. Her eyes, black and hollow, locked onto mine. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was trapped in that in-between state of sleep and wakefulness, paralyzed by fear. She didn't say anything, but I could feel her anger. It radiated off her like heat. My breath caught in my throat, and I squeezed my eyes shut, praying she'd go away. When I opened them again, she was gone. But the dread lingered. The next morning, I decided to tell Jenna about the spirit. She listened carefully, but I could tell she didn't fully believe me, until the night she heard the footsteps. Jenna had stayed late, and as she walked back to her car in the parking lot, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps following her. She turned around, expecting to see another tenant, but no one was there. The footsteps stopped when she did, resuming the moment she started walking again. Panic rising, she hurried to her car. Just as she reached the door and fumbled for her keys, she looked back at the apartment entrance, and saw her. The woman stood at the doorway, staring at Jenna with those same hollow, lifeless eyes. Jenna didn't come over for a while after that. The spirit wasn't just content with scaring me anymore. She wanted Jenna gone, and her methods were becoming more violent. One night, while Jenna and I were watching TV in the living room, the temperature dropped suddenly, so cold we could see our breath in the air. The kitchen cabinet doors began to slam open and shut, faster and faster, like someone was throwing a fit. The lights flickered, and then, with a loud crash, every single glass in the kitchen shattered simultaneously. Jenna screamed, backing away, while I stood frozen, unable to comprehend what was happening. But the worst was yet to come. A few nights later, Jenna decided to spend the night again, despite everything. She didn't believe in ghosts, she said. There had to be a logical explanation. We went to bed, both of us on edge, but exhaustion soon took over. In the middle of the night, I woke to Jenna gasping for air. I turned on the bedside lamp, and my heart nearly stopped. Jenna was lying flat on the bed, her arms pinned down at her sides as if something invisible was holding her down. Her eyes were wide with terror, her mouth moving, but no sound coming out. Panicking, I reached out to her, but as soon as I touched her, an icy coldness shot up my arm, numbing my fingers. I could feel it, the presence, the ghost, holding her down. Jenna's breath hitched as she struggled to break free. Desperation surged through me, and I yanked her up, pulling her from the bed. The cold vanished, but we were both shaking. Jenna sobbed, clutching me tightly. "She's trying to hurt me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I can feel her." That night, we didn't sleep. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light, felt like a warning. The spirit was angry. Furious. And now, she wasn't just targeting Jenna, she was coming for me, too. The next day, I called Jenna to check on her after she left. She told me she was done coming over. She couldn't take it anymore. The ghost wasn't just a passive spirit, it was something darker, something that didn't want anyone else in its space. That night, alone in the apartment, I lay in bed, the tension thick in the air. As I hovered in that space between sleep and wakefulness, I felt it, her. The weight of her presence pressing down on me. Slowly, I opened my eyes, and there she was, standing at the foot of my bed, her wet, tangled hair hanging over her hollow face, water pooling at her feet. This time, she didn't just stare. She took a step closer. And then another. I couldn't move. My body was frozen with fear, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, to run, but it was as if something had gripped me, holding me in place. She leaned in, her face inches from mine, her breath icy against my skin. "You don't belong here," she whispered, her voice echoing in the darkness. And then, with a violent force, something shoved me off the bed. I hit the floor hard, gasping for breath. When I looked up, she was gone, but the room was freezing. The curtains rustled, though the windows were closed, and the door to the closet swung open with a loud creak. That night, I left the apartment, grabbing only my keys and jacket. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay in room 13 any longer. The spirit had made her message clear: this was her home. And no one, not me, not Jenna, was welcome. The days after that night blurred together in a haze of fear and guilt. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her, standing at the foot of my bed, her hollow eyes burning with anger, her cold breath chilling me to the core. She had been patient at first, going about her routine, letting me share her space. But the moment I let Jenna in, the moment I disrupted her life, or what remained of it, everything changed. I couldn't shake the feeling that this was all my fault. I should never have brought Jenna into the apartment. I should never have told her about the spirit. Maybe, just maybe, the woman could have tolerated me. But Jenna's presence had pushed her over the edge, and now it was too late. The spirit wanted me gone. And worse, she wanted to hurt Jenna. After Jenna's last visit, she made it clear she wasn't coming back. I couldn't blame her. The spirit had pinned her down, suffocating her with icy terror. I was supposed to protect her, but instead, I had put her in danger. That haunted me almost as much as the ghost herself. I had to leave. I couldn't stay in room 13 any longer. I'd already overstayed my welcome. The apartment wasn't mine, it never had been. It belonged to her, and I had foolishly thought I could share it. But the truth was, she never left. She was still living her life, bound by the routines of her old existence. I had disrupted that, and now I was paying the price. The next morning, I made the decision. I called the office and told them I was moving out. The receptionist didn't sound surprised, almost as if she'd been expecting this call. "I'll be by to drop off the keys later," I said, my voice shaking slightly. The woman on the other end gave me a quiet, understanding response. She probably knew more about room 13 than she let on. Maybe she had seen this happen before. I spent the rest of the day packing up my things. Every time I passed by the closet, I felt her. The air grew colder, and the door would creak open, just a crack, as if she was watching me. As I moved around the apartment, I could hear the faint sounds of her old routine, the familiar clinking in the kitchen, the water running in the bathroom. It was as if she was reminding me, one last time, that this was her space, and I had violated it. Jenna called me in the afternoon to check in. I didn't tell her about the decision to move, not yet. But she knew something was wrong. "Are you okay?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "You sound distant." "I'm fine," I lied, trying to sound casual. "Just tired." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I've been thinking about what happened," Jenna said finally. "About the spirit. I feel like it's my fault. Maybe if I hadn't come over so much." "No," I interrupted, my guilt twisting like a knife in my chest. "It's not your fault. It's mine. I brought you into this, and I shouldn't have. I should have left a long time ago." Another silence, heavier this time. "What are you going to do?" "I'm moving out. Today." Jenna didn't argue. I think she knew it was the only option left. Later that evening, as the sun set and the apartment grew dim, I stood in the living room, my bags packed and ready to go. The place was eerily quiet. For the first time in weeks, there were no noises in the kitchen, no running water in the bathroom. The air felt heavy with anticipation, as if she knew I was leaving. I walked to the front door, my heart pounding. As I reached for the doorknob, something made me stop. I turned around, and there she was, standing in the hallway, just beyond the bedroom door. She was clearer now, more defined than ever before. Her wet hair clung to her pale face, her hollow eyes locked onto mine. She didn't move. She didn't say anything. She just stood there, staring at me. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I shouldn't have brought her here. I know this is your place. It always was." For a moment, the room seemed to still, as if time itself had paused. The spirit's gaze didn't soften, but I felt something shift in the air, a strange, fleeting sense of understanding. I turned back to the door, opened it, and stepped out into the hallway. As I closed the door behind me, I felt the weight lift from my chest. The tension, the fear, the oppressive presence, it was all gone, left behind in room 13. I handed the keys to the office later that night. The receptionist, an older woman with tired eyes, accepted them without a word. As I turned to leave, she called after me, her voice soft. "Room 13 is a difficult place. You made the right choice." I nodded, unable to speak. I didn't want to know how many others had been in my position before, how many had tried to live there, only to be driven out by the spirit of the woman who refused to leave. As I walked away from the building for the last time, a strange mix of relief and sorrow washed over me. I had escaped, but at what cost? I had disturbed something that wasn't mine, and it had nearly destroyed me, and Jenna. Room 13 was her home. It always would be. And now, it was time for me to let it go. I never looked back. I reconnected with Jenna and we continued our relationship. We got married and bought a house together. And now we have 2 kids with a happy life.